Welcome to a special edition of AI Unraveled. I'm your host, Etienne Noumen. Usually we spend our time analyzing the optimization of artificial neural networks. Today, we are focusing on the most critical piece of infrastructure you own, your biological hardware. Because let's face it, the greatest technology stack in the world is completely useless if your physical system crashes before you actually get to enjoy it. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to subscribe to AI Unraveled directly on Apple Podcasts so you can enjoy this special edition and all our daily briefings completely ads-free. Today, we are deconstructing a massive new study from the European Heart Journal. We are looking at the data from nearly 100,000 participants to prove why working out harder, not just longer, is the ultimate longevity hack. We'll explore the cellular mechanics of vigorous physical activity and why just 15 minutes of surge exercise a week triggers an anti-inflammatory response that can slash your risk of dementia by 63%. Let's unravel the science of your biological upgrade.
Right now, across the globe, tech companies are pouring billions of dollars into liquid cooling systems.
Oh, absolutely. Billions.
Yeah, and like tweaking algorithmic parameters, upgrading server racks, just to squeeze a tiny fractional percentage of better performance from their tech stacks.
Right. We treat that silicon like it is the absolute most precious commodity on Earth.
Exactly. Yet, the very people writing that code, managing those systems, driving this whole technological revolution, they are letting the most complex machine in the known universe literally rust at their desks.
You mean their own bodies?
I mean their own biological hardware.
Yeah, it really is the defining paradox of the modern knowledge worker, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, we are engineering this frictionless, hyper-optimized external world while completely abandoning the internal physical infrastructure we actually need to exist in it.
We're running state-of-the-art software on a chassis that, well, hasn't seen basic maintenance in a decade.
Literally a decade for some people.
Which is exactly why we are ripping up the traditional script on health today. So consider this deep dive an elite biological strategy session tailored specifically for you, the AI Unraveled audience.
Right. We are not doing a standard fitness routine here.
No, we are no longer talking about exercise as some tedious moral chore or like a New Year's resolution that you guilt yourself into doing until February.
Thank goodness, because those never work anyway.
They never work. So we are reframing it entirely as an optimization protocol.
I like that phrasing.
Right. This is the mandatory, non-negotiable systemic maintenance required to, well, survive and thrive during the coming technological singularity.
Because, I mean, if the biological hardware crashes, your external tech stack is entirely irrelevant.
Exactly. And to figure out what this maintenance protocol actually looks like, we aren't relying on, outdated fitness magazines.
No, we have real data today.
We do. We are pulling apart a groundbreaking study published in March 2026 in the European Heart Journal, led by Professor Mingsu Shen.
And what makes this so fascinating is that we are pairing this high-level clinical data with real-time, messy human beta testing.
Right, from a massive community thread on Reddit's Our Science forum.
So we get the pristine lab data and the wild real-world data at the same time.
Best of both worlds. And just to give you a framework for what we're unpacking today, think about it like this. If moderate exercise, like taking a nice, easy stroll around the neighborhood...
Which is great, by the way.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Okay.
But if that is like running a low-level background antivirus scan, then the vigorous physical activity, or VPA, that we are zeroing in on today...
VPA, right.
Yeah, that is like aggressively overclocking your CPU to force a systemic hardware upgrade.
See, I'd actually push that analogy even further.
Really? How so?
Well, because overclocking implies running a system, past its intended limits, like you're risking a crash.
Right. You might fry the motherboard.
Exactly. But what Professor Shen's data proves is that this high-intensity physical state, it isn't pushing the human body past its limits at all.
It's not.
No, it is the fundamental evolutionary trigger required to keep the system functioning at its baseline.
Oh, wow. So we actually need it just to be normal.
Yes. It shifts the entire global conversation about fitness away from volume like how many monotonous hours you can log on a treadmill.
Right.
And it moves it to a question of intensity. It's about acute systemic shock.
Systemic shock. I want to linger on that, actually, because it runs completely contrary to the entire, 10,000 steps a day, gentle wellness narrative we've been fed for years.
It absolutely does.
But before we get into the biology of that shock, we have to talk about the data itself.
Right, the foundation.
Yeah, because to prove that this surge compute mechanic actually works, the researchers needed a data set so massive and so pristine that it eliminated the noise of standard fitness science.
And let's be honest, fitness science has historically been plagued by dirty data.
Oh, incredibly dirty. Why is that, mostly?
Primarily because it relied almost entirely on human self-reporting. I mean, for decades, a researcher would just hand a participant a questionnaire asking, how many minutes of vigorous activity did you engage in last week?
Which is a psychological minefield.
Totally.
I mean, human memory is inherently flawed, but when you introduce ego into it, and the social desirability bias,
the data becomes basically fictional at that point.
literally fictional. People dramatically overestimate their activity. They write down that they went for a 30-minute run.
When the reality is quite different.
Right. The physical reality is they jogged for 8 minutes, felt winded, and walked the rest of the way while scrolling on their phone.
Exactly. And that phenomenon makes it incredibly difficult to isolate the biological impact of true intensity.
Because the researchers think the person ran for 30 minutes.
Right. So to fix this, Professor Shen and the team utilized the UK Biobank.
Which is massive.
It's one of the most comprehensive health data sets in existence. They tracked 96,408 people.
Almost 100,000 human subjects.
Yeah, and they bypassed the psychological reporting entirely. Instead of asking them what they did, they strapped research-grade wrist accelerometers to every single participant.
For how long?
For a full, continuous week.
Wow, so they captured the raw, unbiased telemetry of their physical movement.
Down to the millisecond.
That is incredible.
They isolated the exact kinetic signatures of their daily lives. But, the measurement was only the first step.
Right, you need the outcomes.
Exactly. The true methodological brilliance is what came next. They didn't just measure the movement and write a paper. They locked in that data and then tracked those exact same individuals through medical records.
For a 7-year observation period, right?
Yes, monitoring the development of 8 major life-altering chronic diseases over those 7 years.
So we have objective movement data perfectly mapped to long-term systemic health outcomes. That's bulletproof.
It really is.
But, I need to challenge a term here. Because vigorous physical activity, or VPA, it sounds like a sterile clinical bucket. What is the actual objective biological threshold for this optimization protocol?
Good question.
Because, if I'm severely out of shape, I might get winded just carrying groceries up a flight of stairs.
Right.
But if a marathon runner does the exact same thing, their heart rate barely bumps. So are we both achieving VPA?
That is the crucial distinction, and the answer is yes.
Okay, why?
Because VPA is relative to the individual's biological baseline. It is defined by a simple, brutal, universal metric.
Which is?
Getting completely, overwhelmingly out of breath.
Literally just breathless.
Yes. It doesn't matter what physical action gets you there. One of the beta testers on the Reddit thread actually articulated this perfectly through a linguistic test.
Oh, I saw that. The speaking test.
Right. So moderate activity is when you can speak a sentence, but you have to break it up with breaths. You are working, but the system is managing the load.
So you can have a conversation, but it's a bit choppy.
Exactly. But vigorous physical activity, the specific evolutionary trigger we are isolating today, is the threshold where you absolutely cannot say a sentence.
You're just gasping.
You are gasping. The biological system is maxed out. Your oxygen demand has vastly exceeded your comfortable oxygen supply.
The biological CPU is hitting 100% utilization.
Yes, perfect analogy.
But what is actually happening under the hood when we cross that linguistic threshold? I mean, why does the body need to panic to upgrade?
Okay, let's break down Professor Shen's surge compute mechanics at a cellular level.
Let's do it.
When you are gasping for air, you are artificially inducing acute physiological stress. It is an emergency signal.
Like an alarm going off.
Exactly. You are flooding the system with a chemical message that says, our current physical capacity is insufficient for the demands of our environment. We are failing.
Like the primal brain realizing, oh, wow, we're currently being hunted by a predator. We are too slow. We need to upgrade the physical infrastructure immediately, or we are going to die.
That is the exact evolutionary pathway.
That's wild.
And in response to that acute crisis, the body doesn't just recover, it overcompensates.
To make sure it doesn't happen again.
Exactly, to ensure survival for the next perceived threat. So the heart muscle is forced to contract with vastly more power, increasing its stroke volume.
Pumping way more blood.
Right, but the real magic happens in the vascular system. When the heart pumps that massive surge of blood, it creates immense physical friction.
Friction inside the veins.
Yes, it's called shear stress. It's friction against the inner lining of your blood vessels, the endothelium.
Okay, so the pipes are suddenly handling a high-pressure surge.
And that physical shear stress forces those endothelial cells to release nitric oxide.
Which does what?
It dilates the blood vessels, forcing them to become wider and far more flexible.
So it's structurally upgrading the pipes.
Exactly. And simultaneously, inside your muscle cells, the acute lack of oxygen forces your body to build more mitochondria.
Power plants of the cell.
Right, the cellular power plants, so that it can utilize oxygen more efficiently next time.
Okay, I see.
And Professor Shen's data reveals that low-intensity, casual walking simply cannot generate enough shear stress or oxygen debt to trigger this specific structural hardware upgrade.
So you could walk for 3 hours on a treadmill.
You could.
And it burns calories, it lubricates the joints. I mean, it's undeniably good for basic maintenance, right?
Absolutely, it has benefits.
But because it never forces the system into that cannot speak a sentence state of panic, you entirely miss out on the vascular and mitochondrial upgrade.
Precisely. You are maintaining the chassis, but you aren't upgrading the engine.
You are surviving, not optimizing.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the actual crash reports.
The disease outcomes.
Right. We understand how to trigger the surge now, but we need to examine exactly which biological system failures this protocol prevents.
Because the results from that 7-year tracking period are not just interesting.
No, they're completely paradigm shifting. The researchers tracked 8 major conditions, correct?
They tracked what is essentially the master list of modern mortality and morbidity.
Give me the list.
Major cardiovascular disease, irregular heartbeat, type 2 diabetes, immune-mediated inflammatory diseases.
Which includes things like what?
Conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis.
Okay, what else?
Liver disease, chronic respiratory diseases, chronic kidney disease, and dementia.
That list represents, honestly, the bulk of the suffering and system degradation in the modern world.
It really does.
And the data from tracking these specific diseases revealed something deeply counterintuitive, particularly when we look at the inflammatory response.
The inflammatory paradox.
Yeah, because let me tell you, when I push myself to that absolute breathless, threshold-like sprinting, heavy lifting, whatever it is,
Yeah.
I do not feel anti-inflammatory.
No, you feel terrible.
I feel awful. My muscles swell, my joints ache. I feel a deep radiating heat in my tissues. I feel profoundly inflamed.
Right.
So how does pushing the human machine into the red line actually act as a systemic anti-inflammatory protocol? It sounds like a biological paradox.
It feels like a paradox because we often conflate acute stress with chronic inflammation.
They aren't the same thing.
They are vastly different physiological states. When you execute a bout of vigorous physical activity, you are absolutely causing acute, localized trauma.
I'm tearing muscles.
Yes, you are creating micro tears in your muscle fibers. In the immediate aftermath, your body rushes pro-inflammatory cytokines to the area to clear out the damaged tissue and begin the rebuilding process.
And that is the swelling and soreness I feel.
That's exactly what that is.
Okay, so the immediate response is inflammatory. Where does the protection come in?
It comes in the rebound.
The rebound.
Yeah. In response to that acute localized spike, the body's immune system releases a massive cascade of anti-inflammatory compounds.
To put the fire out.
Exactly, to bring the fire back under control and return the system to homeostasis. By repeatedly forcing the immune system to cycle through this intense peak and subsequent cool down, you are essentially training the immune system to regulate itself.
Like calibrating a thermostat.
You are calibrating the exact biological thermostat.
So people who are entirely sedentary have immune systems that are bored and poorly calibrated.
Yes.
And they develop chronic, low-grade inflammation because the system never gets a strong, acute signal telling it when to turn on and when to turn off.
Exactly. And the data from the UK Biobank study explicitly backs this up.
How so?
Well, for immune-mediated inflammatory diseases like psoriasis and arthritis, the researchers found that intensity was almost the exclusive metric that mattered for reducing risk.
Wait, really? So for an inflammatory disease, The sheer volume of exercise like walking for 10 hours a week didn't matter nearly as much as just getting completely breathless.
Volume played a negligible role for those specific immune conditions.
That is wild.
It was the sheer brutal intensity that served as the necessary trigger to reset the immune system's baseline.
So it's all about the shock.
For the immune system, yes. Now, contrast that with a metabolic condition like type 2 diabetes or chronic liver disease.
What did the data show there?
For those, the data showed that both the volume of activity and the intensity played a significant role in reducing risk.
Because those are tied to burning energy, right?
Exactly. Those diseases are heavily tied to total energy expenditure and glucose clearing over time. But for the inflammatory cascade, the sheer shock of intensity was the key.
It is shocking the immune system back into balance. And, speaking of the necessity of keeping complex systems in balance, for decision makers who are trying to optimize both their professional infrastructure and their biological longevity, you cannot rely on guesswork.
No, you really can't.
You need high-fidelity data. JamGumMind provides human-verified technical-grade analysis across healthcare and tech. If you are navigating the complexities of modern system optimization, visit djamgummind.com.
Having reliable, unfiltered data is the foundation of any successful strategy, whether you are analyzing macroeconomic market trends or your own vital signs.
And the integrity of the UK Biobank data is exactly what makes these conclusions so unassailable.
It's rock solid.
Let's cement the ultimate bottom-line statistic regarding the cardiovascular and systemic data before we move to the brain.
We should, because this number is staggering.
It is. According to Professor Shen's findings, those individuals who had the highest proportion of vigorous physical activity in their daily movement saw a 46% lower risk of dying overall compared to those doing no vigorous activity.
A near halving of all-cause mortality risk?
That is just ridiculous.
You are statistically cutting your chance of death over that 7-year period in half simply by ensuring that a fraction of your movement pushes you to the breathless threshold.
But the upgrade isn't just for the cardiovascular pipes or the immune system's thermostat.
No, it goes much deeper.
It directly physically alters our wetware, the brain itself.
The most important hardware of all.
Exactly. Let's look at the cognitive impact, because this is the finding that should make every single tech worker, knowledge worker, and creative sitting at a desk right now sit bolt upright.
It is arguably the most consequential finding in the entire paper.
Tell them the number.
The researchers isolated the neurological data and found a staggering 63% lower risk of developing dementia for those who maximize their proportion of VPA.
A 63% drop in dementia.
Huge!
I want to make sure I'm translating this correctly. We're talking about a physical, muscular exertion like breathing hard, sweating, legs burning.
Right.
How does that mechanical stress below the neck translate to a 63% reduction in the physical degradation of the neural network inside the skull?
It seems disconnected, right?
Yeah. Are we literally outrunning cognitive decline by sprinting up a flight of stairs?
Biologically speaking, yes. Yes, you are.
Really?
Well, the brain is not a computer sitting in a sterile vacuum. It is a biological organ floating in a chemical bath, and it's deeply reliant on the cardiovascular system.
Okay.
When you engage in VPA, you aren't just pumping blood, you are drastically altering the chemical composition of that bath.
Altering it how?
Vigorous activity stimulates the brain to synthesize and release specific neurochemicals, and the most critical one is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
BDNF. I've heard this described as miracle grow for the brain.
That's a very common analogy, but let's make it more precise.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine the neural pathways in your brain as a dense, incredibly complex forest. Over time, due to stress, aging, and a sedentary lifestyle, parts of that forest start to wither.
The connections die off.
Exactly. The connections between trees weaken. BDNF acts like a sudden influx of intense sunlight and nutrients.
So it revitalizes the forest.
Right, but it doesn't just keep the existing brain cells healthy. It is the fundamental chemical required for neuroplasticity.
Meaning?
The ability of the brain to literally grow new dendrites, form new synaptic connections, and route around damaged areas.
So intense physical exercise is chemically forcing the brain to wire new physical pathways.
Yes, literally forcing structural brain growth. But BDNF is only half the equation. The other half is the brain's waste management system.
Oh, right.
Throughout the day, as your neurons fire, they produce metabolic waste, things like misfolded proteins and amyloid plaques.
And those are the things tied to Alzheimer's, right?
Yes, they are the primary culprits in the development of Alzheimer's and dementia. Now, the brain has its own plumbing network, called the glymphatic system, to clear this junk out.
And I'm guessing sitting rigidly at a desk for 9 hours a day doesn't exactly get the plumbing flowing.
Not at all. It stagnates. But when you engage in vigorous physical activity, remember that massive increase in blood pressure and sheer stress we talked about.
Yeah, the high pressure in the pipes.
Right. That intense vascular surge acts like a biological pressure washer for the brain.
A pressure washer.
Literally, the increased hemodynamic force pushes cerebrospinal fluid through the brain tissue at a higher velocity, physically flushing those neurotoxic plaques and metabolic junk out of the neural network.
Before they can build up.
Exactly, before they can accumulate and cause degradation.
That is a wildly vivid mechanism.
Sure.
So by staying sedentary, you aren't just letting your muscles atrophy. You are allowing highly toxic biochemical sludge to actively accumulate in your wetware.
Sludge is the perfect word for it.
You are suffocating the neural pathways because you are never giving the system the required high-pressure flush signal.
The human brain evolved to require the extreme physical stress of the body to trigger its own internal maintenance and cleaning protocols.
If you remove the physical stress.
The brain's cleaning cycle never fully engages.
Look, the reality is that the AI landscape and the modern tech sector move faster than a hallucinating LLM on a double espresso.
Oh, easily.
You are constantly under pressure to perform, which is why Etienne has done the heavy lifting for you to optimize your external systems while you optimize your biology. Head over to djamminggamemind.com/toolkit for the AI Executive Toolkit.
Highly recommend checking that out.
It's a hand-picked, forensic-vetted implementation stack featuring tools like Chatbase, 11 Labs, and ARIA, complete with exclusive listener perks to get your firm running at light speed. You optimize your biological wetware with a VPA pressure wash, and you optimize your workflow with the toolkit.
Because efficiency is the core theme here, right? Finding the absolute highest leverage actions that yield the maximum possible output, both in software and in human biology.
Which perfectly transitions us to the practical reality of this protocol.
Yes, how do we actually do it?
Because knowing that VPA cuts dementia risk by 63% and mortality by 46% is scientifically fascinating. But it is practically useless if the protocol takes too long to run.
People just won't do it.
Exactly. Modern knowledge workers are desperately time-starved. If this required an hour of extreme breathless suffering every single day, the adherence rate would be 0.
Totally 0.
But Professor Shen's study revealed what I can only describe as the ultimate efficiency hack.
It is the biological Pareto principle in its purest form. And the numbers are almost hard to believe until you look at the raw accelerometer data.
What were the numbers?
The study definitively showed that you do not need hours of extreme exertion. Just 15 to 20 minutes per week of vigorous physical activity provides a massive, statistically significant bulk of those health benefits.
15 to 20 minutes a week. We are talking about roughly 2 to 3 minutes a day of breathless exertion. That entirely dismantles the "I don't have time to exercise" objection.
It completely reframes what exercise even is. You don't need a 2-hour gym session. You don't need specialized apparel or an expensive membership.
You just need a brief, intense systemic shock.
And because the required duration is so incredibly short, it perfectly aligns with the concept of incidental VPA.
Incidental VPA, meaning you don't carve out a block of time to work out. You just aggressively alter how you interact with the physical friction of your daily environment.
Exactly. It's about looking at your daily routine and finding opportunities to inject brief moments of maximum output.
Like what?
Choosing to take the stairs instead of the elevator, but not just walking up them, taking them fast enough that by the 3rd flight, you cannot speak a sentence.
Or walking aggressively fast between meetings or errands to the point where your heart rate spikes significantly.
Right. There was an incredible interaction on the Reddit thread regarding this.
Oh, the bus guy.
Yes. One user was reading this study and had this massive realization. They realized they had inadvertently been hitting these optimal VPA metrics for years, simply because they are, in their own words, chronically late and always chasing buses or running to stuff in a panic.
That is a hilarious anecdote, but physiologically it is perfectly sound.
It is completely sound.
I loved it, but the user actually asked a really interesting follow-up question. They wondered if the psychological cortisol spike, like the sheer mental stress of being late and panicking, canceled out the physical cardiovascular benefits of the sprint.
Right, the worry that the stress was ruining the workout.
Exactly. What did you make of that?
From a biological standpoint, the answer is no. It doesn't cancel it out.
Why not?
Think about the evolutionary context of our biology. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors didn't casually jog for fitness.
No, they ran for their lives.
Exactly. Their extreme exertion was always tied to intense psychological stress. They sprinted to catch a fleeing animal for food, or they sprinted in absolute terror to avoid being eaten by a predator.
So panic is built into the mechanism.
Our physiology was forged in the fire of panic-induced maximal intensity bursts. The annoyance of missing a commuter train might spike your modern anxiety, but that physical, breathless sprint down the platform,
That's the signal.
that is the exact ancient signal your biological hardware is waiting for.
So the stress of being late is literally saving their life. That is phenomenal.
It's a great reframe for chronically late people.
It really is. But, taking a protocol that looks flawless in a pristine clinical paper and applying it to the messy, complicated reality of everyday human life requires beta testing.
Always.
And this brings us to the most valuable part of pulling from the Reddit science community: troubleshooting the physical limitations.
The bugs in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the immediate glaring objection to telling a sedentary 45-year-old tech worker to suddenly sprint until they are breathless is the structural integrity of their chassis.
Ah, yes. The joint hardware limitation.
The single biggest point of failure.
It is the single biggest point of failure for people attempting to implement a VPA protocol.
Right. If I take a 10-year-old computer and instantly overclock the CPU to maximum capacity without upgrading the cooling or the motherboard, the system is going to physically melt.
It's fast.
If you take someone who has been sitting in a Herman Miller chair for 15 years and tell them to go sprint down the sidewalk, their cardiovascular engine might handle it, but their knees and ankles are going to shatter.
Oh, completely. One Reddit user articulated this perfectly.
What happened to them?
They started doing high-intensity interval training, specifically sprinting on pavement, and they noted that while they developed incredible leg muscles and experienced a massive runner's high,
Let me guess. The knees.
the protocol completely destroyed their knees.
Classic. That user experienced the classic disconnect between cardiovascular capacity and skeletal tissue tolerance.
Which raises an incredibly important biomechanical question.
How do you artificially induce maximum cardiovascular panic without subjecting the skeletal chassis to destructive kinetic shock waves?
Exactly. And this is where the community crowdsourced some absolute gold.
They really did. They developed a series of low-impact VPA hacks. Let's break down the mechanics of the best ones.
The first one is great.
Yeah, the first one is what I'm calling the elliptical hack. Now, in hardcore fitness circles, the elliptical machine is often mocked, right?
Oh, mercilessly.
It's viewed as the easy machine for people who aren't serious. But one biohacker shared that they dropped 75 pounds and drastically improved their cardiovascular metrics by burning 600 calories in 40 minutes on a maximum resistance, experiencing zero joint pain.
Zero.
Why does that specific machine work so well for this protocol?
It comes down to physics, really, and the concept of the closed kinetic chain. Another user correctly pointed out the history of the elliptical. It was originally engineered specifically for patients recovering from hip and knee replacements.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. When you run on pavement, every single footfall sends a kinetic shockwave up through the ankle, into the knee, and up to the hip, often at forces equivalent to 3 or 4 times your body weight.
That's a lot of pounding.
But the elliptical is a closed kinetic chain. Your foot never leaves the pedal. It entirely removes the ground reaction force.
So you remove the kinetic impact. But how do you reach the breathless threshold if it's considered an easy machine?
By manipulating resistance rather than speed.
Ah.
If you crank the resistance on an elliptical to its absolute maximum and focus on driving downward through your heels, you are forcing the massive muscles of your glutes and quads to work against immense friction.
Like pushing a sled.
Exactly like pushing a heavy sled. You can easily push your cardiovascular system into that cannot speak a sentence red line without a single micro trauma to your joint cartilage.
It's the perfect hardware workaround.
It really is.
Okay. Hack number 2 from the community. Uphill walking. This seems almost too simple to be a biohack, but the biomechanics are fascinating.
It fundamentally alters the physics of forward momentum. By walking up a steep incline, whether you crank a treadmill up to a 15% grade or find a literal hill in your neighborhood, you are forcing your cardiovascular system to fight gravity in a much more direct way than walking on flat ground.
It spikes the heart rate so fast.
You vastly increase the oxygen demand, quickly reaching the VPA threshold, while simultaneously keeping the impact forces remarkably low.
Because you aren't falling down on the ground.
Right, you are stepping up to meet the ground rather than falling down onto it.
But the community pointed out a major flaw with real-world hills. Going up is great for the heart, but coming back down is a nightmare for the knees.
Oh yes, the eccentric braking forces of walking downhill are notoriously destructive to the patellar tendon.
So what was the fix?
The community's elegant solution to this was using trekking poles for the descent.
Just simple hiking poles.
Yep. By engaging the upper body and planting the poles, you transfer a massive percentage of the load away from the knees and directly into the arms and shoulders. It is a highly effective ancestral movement pattern.
Simple, low-tech, and incredibly effective.
Agreed.
Then we have a slightly different approach, the strength-based methodology. There was a gripping anecdote from a 41-year-old powerlifter in the thread.
Oh, that story was intense.
He shared that he had suffered from Osgood-Schlatter disease, which is a brutal chronic inflammation of the patellar ligament at the knee since he was a child. He said it hurt just to lay down in bed.
Which is miserable.
But he managed to entirely cure his knee pain by doing heavy barbell squats.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right. The crucial detail he added, though, was that he always kept reps in reserve. He never pushed the muscle to absolute failure. How does lifting heavy weights fix joint pain so you can engage in VPA?
That is about building biological shock absorbers.
Shock absorbers.
Joints, tendons, and ligaments have very poor blood supply, which means they adapt and heal incredibly slowly. Okay.
Muscle tissue, however, is highly vascular and adapts quickly. If you have weak leg muscles, every time you step, run, or jump, the impact forces bypass the muscle and slam directly into the cartilages and tendons.
Oh, no, got damage.
Right. But by performing heavy squats while keeping reps in reserve to avoid catastrophic fatigue and injury, that user built a massive, strong sheath of quad and hamstring muscle around his knee joint.
He essentially built a suspension system.
Precisely. A strong muscular base intercepts and absorbs the kinetic load before it can damage the fragile joint hardware. He cured his lifelong joint pain by upgrading the structural supports around it, allowing him to handle higher intensity loads without injury.
That is structural biohacking at its finest. Now let's pivot to the futuristic psychological hacks.
Gamifying the protocol.
Yes. We had a user who achieves their massive VPA metrics by playing an intense virtual reality game called Underdog's Rampage.
I love this one. They strapped on a heart rate monitor and realized they were hitting crazy high-intensity cardiovascular zones simply through the immersive motivation of trying to survive in a virtual arena.
The psychological friction of exercise is often the hardest part to overcome.
Because it's boring.
Because it hurts, and it's boring. When you are on a stationary bike staring at a timer, your brain is hyper-aware of the physical suffering. Every second is magnified.
Good.
But the human brain is highly susceptible to immersive visual and auditory input. When this user puts on a VR headset, their brain genuinely perceives a life or death threat within the game environment.
The adrenaline masks the pain.
Exactly. The massive surge of adrenaline and dopamine overrides the conscious perception of fatigue. They are swinging their arms, dodging, and weaving at maximum intensity because their primal brain believes it is necessary for survival.
They don't even realize they're working out.
Accidental workout games might be the absolute future of the biological upgrade for the massive segment of the population that genuinely hates traditional repetitive exercise.
You just trick your brain into optimizing your body. I absolutely love it. And finally, the community classic, the cycling dopamine overload.
A classic for a reason.
A user chimed in saying that road biking at maximum intensity provides massive cardiovascular stress and a dopamine rush that leaves them exhausted for a day, but makes them feel biologically incredible.
The bicycle is arguably the most efficient mechanical translation of human power ever invented.
Because there's no impact.
Exactly. Because your weight is entirely supported by the saddle, you bypass the impact limitations of the ankles, knees, and hips entirely.
So you can just push.
You can safely push your heart rate to its absolute red line maximum, sustaining the surge compute state far longer than you could while running, which maximizes both the BDNF release in the brain and the sheer stress in the blood vessels.
But as with any incredibly powerful systemic protocol, we have an obligation to read the system warnings.
Yes, very important.
This is not a toy. Professor Shen was very careful to include caveats in the study, and we saw this instantly validated in the Reddit thread by users managing complex autoimmune conditions, specifically rheumatoid arthritis, or RA.
Right.
Vigorous physical activity is a powerful tool, but it is not a blanket magical cure-all. and it is absolutely not safe for everyone to jump into immediately.
The critical distinction we must make is between preventing a disease and treating an active, chronic flare-up of an existing condition.
They are very different states.
Exactly. As we broke down earlier, VPA is an incredible mechanism for preventing inflammatory diseases by training the immune system. But when a patient with rheumatoid arthritis is in the middle of a severe flare-up, their immune system is already in a state of hyperactive chronic alarm.
The system is already redlining. One user with RA posted a stark warning.
What did they say?
They noted that trying to push through an intense workout during a flare-up backfired catastrophically. It caused massive, acute swelling in their lymph nodes, to the point where they couldn't even put their arms down by their sides because the nodes in their armpits were so inflamed and painful.
That is a perfect example of system overload. If the immune system is already desperately fighting an autoimmune response, adding the acute physical shock of VPA doesn't reset the thermostat, it blows the fuses.
It's just too much stress.
The body interprets the exercise as another massive wave of tissue damage, and the inflammatory cascade spirals out of control. For anyone with a chronic medical condition, you must respect the biological baseline.
It is literally like trying to run a massive intensive system update on a server while it is actively overheating and fending off a malware attack.
You have to cool the room down first.
You have to stabilize the system before you can install the upgrade. And this principle of pacing applies to age and sedentary history, too. We had a great comment from a Jen Jones retired marathoner.
Yes, the voice of seasoned experience.
They issued a stern reminder to older adults, or frankly anyone in their 30s or 40s, who is starting from a completely sedentary baseline.
You can't just sprint.
Right.
Right.
You cannot read this study, jump off the couch, and immediately attempt to sprint up a hill. Your cardiovascular system might be willing, but your tendons and ligaments are brittle.
You will snap something.
You must build a strong base layer of low-intensity endurance and tissue tolerance over a period of months before you ever attempt to push for maximum intensity.
You have to condition the hardware over time so it is physically capable of accepting the high-voltage upgrade.
Exactly. Okay, let's zoom out and pull all of these threads together to summarize the core of this biological upgrade.
It's been a dense deep dive.
Very. But the massive data set from the European Heart Journal and the granular telemetry from the UK Biobank make it abundantly clear. Intensity is not just a metric for elite athletes or biohackers.
No, it is a fundamental, hardwired evolutionary trigger that every single human body desperately requires to maintain its structural hardware and its cognitive wetware.
It is the biological difference between slowly degrading and actively thriving. The human system is designed to respond to high-intensity demand.
And the barrier to entry is shockingly low.
15 to 20 minutes a week, 2 to 3 minutes a day of pure, breathless exertion. That is the biological cheat code.
It really is a cheat code.
It is the optimization protocol that unlocks a 63% drop in the risk of dementia. It cuts your overall mortality risk by 46%. It acts as a pressure washer for the biochemical junk in your brain. It forces your blood vessels to adapt and become flexible, and it provides a systemic anti-inflammatory reset to your entire immune system.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to really mull over, drawing on everything we've unpacked regarding evolutionary biology and our modern environment.
Let's hear it.
Look around you. We've spent the last century building a perfectly climate-controlled, ultra-convenient, completely sedentary modern world.
Yep.
We have engineered a frictionless tech utopia where you can order food, work, and socialize without ever elevating your heart rate.
The ultimate comfort zone.
But that very lack of friction is starving our biology. We are depriving our bodies of the exact acute stress signals they evolved to use as vital maintenance triggers.
Wow.
If just a few minutes a week of feeling overwhelmingly out of breath, simply mimicking the life or death sprints of our ancient ancestors, is powerful enough to keep ourselves young and drastically stave off the physical degradation of our brains.
What else are we missing?
Exactly. What other ancient, mild physical stressors are we entirely missing out on? What other environmental shocks, perhaps extreme temperatures, fasting, or varied physical terrain, does the human machine secretly crave to stay fully optimized?
That is a brilliant and slightly terrifying question to leave him with. The comfort crisis is very real, and the friction is the feature, not the bug. Thank you for diving deep into the biology with us today.
Always a pleasure.
For everyone listening, it's time to go find your breathless threshold. Subscribe to AI Unraveled on Apple Podcasts to listen completely, ads-free.
That concludes our special biological edition of AI Unraveled. The signal for today is intensity. We are standing on the precipice of the greatest technological leap in human history. Artificial intelligence is going to revolutionize medicine, extend lifespans, and reshape society. But you cannot outsource your own cardiovascular system to the cloud. You have to upgrade your biological hardware so you can survive to see the software of tomorrow. And speaking of upgrading your software, look, the AI landscape moves faster than a hallucinating LLM on a double espresso, which is why I've done the heavy lifting for you. Stop scrolling through generic top 10 lists and head over to the AI Executive Toolkit at djamgamind.com/toolkit. I've handpicked and forensic vetted every tool on this list, from Chatbase and 11 Labs to Aeria and Google Workspace, to ensure they meet the rigorous standards of a professional and the high-stakes needs of the AI Unraveled community. Consider this your curated implementation stack to bridge the gap between raw innovation and professional-grade governance, complete with exclusive listener perks to get your firm running at light speed. This episode was made possible by Mind. I'm Etienne Newman. Stay healthy, stay sharp, and keep unraveling the future. And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads, we build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgamind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.